I thank for everybody who tuned in all year and listened to us.
Yeah.
You know what? I think we talked, about some music, about some housing, a lot of financial literacy things. We talked about credit and income and assets and, really what's going on here in Halifax and a lot about the Bank of Canada. So, it's exciting to, kind of wrap up financial literacy. We're going to talk about a lot of great topics today, and we have a bunch of guests, so I'm super pumped.
We do have a bunch of guests, including Chris Turcotte, who I just met.
You've met him for the second time. He's been in your studio before.
Whatever. That was so long ago in radio, you forget these things. Do you want to introduce Chris Turcotte, or do you want me to?
Well, he's, my friend, and maybe your friend too, because you're going to see him tomorrow night again. Chris is the president of Centum Financial Group, which is a national brokerage, which we are a part of. And, we're so excited to have Chris here on the show. And he's going to give us a little bit of perspective about, what's happening in the West Coast, in Ontario. Because, we're talking about, a housing crisis. And we're talking about, really where the price is going and how things have been really challenging here in Halifax. But I think sometimes it's good to get a little bit of perspective on what's going on across the country, because I think we're in our own little bubble here.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's do that without further ado. Was that your introduction, by the way?
That was my intro.
Okay.
That's what I'm starting to wonder here. Was that my introduction?
That was your intro.
Gentlemen, it's fine. And Todd, I'm hurt. We have met several times.
Not several.
You know how I remember? Because I remember I'm like, damn, that guy has a face for radio.
Oh, that's so mean.
That was mean. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you know what? Where we met was over at the studio at News 95.7. We were at the radio station.
That's right.
And that was 3 years ago now,
I would say 3 or 4 years, and now obviously it's City News Halifax.
Yeah.
Oh, did not know that.
Yeah, I said News 95.7.
That's what it was at the time.
Thanks for correcting me.
Anyway, this is why I'm here.
City.
Let's talk some finance.
City News 95.7. All right, so to that, to the climate on the West Coast, some are comparing the East Coast here in Halifax and what's going on as the potentially future West Coast, Vancouver. Do you see that happening or no?
Well, that snow that greeted me this morning, that's going to be a quick no. But the fact that we don't get that. But, values, watching what's been happening here in Halifax, and obviously very close relationship with Clinton and seeing that volume come in. I think it's certainly not the same values we're seeing in Vancouver, but there's no question that the rate at which the market is escalating is starting to look very, very similar. Mm-hmm. What I'm most interested in the comparables, and Clinton, I'm going to lean on you to elaborate here, is the money coming in from overseas. I'm not sure if that's as prominent here in Halifax versus a Vancouver, where we have, there's a predominant injection of money coming in from China, right? So that is doing a few different things, but the main thing it's doing is it's really driving up values where you can't get a 2-bedroom, two bath apartment for anywhere near $1 million.
Are there rules in place that are restricting that at all? Like any taxation rules, any levy, any type of fees that are in place?
Well, they've certainly tried, right? There's been foreign buyers taxes. That China has made it more difficult to get money out. But if there's one thing we've learned over the years, look at Hong Kong in the 80s and things like that, there's always a way. There's always a loophole, and the rules are only good for so long until it...
Yeah. And if somebody's rich, they're going to pay it.
And that is the other thing as well, right? Like
right.
Most of the stuff being bought overseas, they haven't even seen these places, right? It's more important to park money on Canadian soil than it is to be picky about what you're buying, right? I'm curious to see. I don't know if that would translate here to the East
it's
Coast.
not happening as much here in Halifax. I mean, it certainly does happen, Chris. Like, we definitely deal with some new to Canada. But I think that primarily the new to Canada that we're dealing with every day are buying these homes as owner-occupied. I'll be 100% honest with you. Mm-hmm. We've certainly had a lot of growth in our population here in Halifax. And some of that has come from new to Canada. But I would say a lot of the growth that we've had is from people moving from Toronto, moving from Calgary, moving from Vancouver. And in some cases, they're selling, maybe a 1-bedroom condo or maybe a 2-bedroom condo. And they're coming here and they're able to buy a single detached, like a brand new construction home. So we're seeing some of that for sure. And some people are coming here to buy their first home, I think, because obviously our average house price is, under $500,000. It is a lot more achievable, I think, here than maybe some of the other areas of the country.
Yeah, see, back home in Vancouver, you can't buy dirt for $500,000.
Like
right?
not even a 1-bedroom condo.
Not even
not a lot.
Not even like just for fun for any of the listeners. Go in Vancouver proper, hit MLS, and you'll see houses along Granville Avenue that will say to be torn down, and you can't find one for under $5 million.
Wow.
So I have often asked the question, how are people who outside of rich foreigners or rich people in general affording the regular working person, even if you had two doctors making $300,000 a year, or maybe not doctors,
Each, maybe.
whatever, yeah.
Yeah.
How are people still affording these types of mortgages? I don't get it.
Well, and that's a great question, Todd. And I think the answer to that is the reason we have an empty home tax, right? So doctors locally in Vancouver are not, or doctors might be the only exception of why it's happening, right? But you're right. The everyday person, husband and wife making $90,000 each, you're not buying a home in Vancouver, right?
No.
You're not. But what you're doing is you're doing what myself and a lot of our friends do is you're commuting 45 minutes into downtown Vancouver,
Right.
Where we're relying heavily on transit, and Clinton's been there a bunch of times, the SkyTrain and everything else. So it's definitely a little bit different.
And like, don't get me wrong, people drive 45 minutes in Halifax, but that's not the norm here. The norm is people live within, 10, 15, 20 minutes of downtown. And, we even have a cultural divide with the bridge. If you live in Dartmouth, you don't want to come to Halifax. And if you live in Halifax, you really don't want to go to Dartmouth, which I know that kind of sounds strange. And I'm sure, like Chris, you've been on both sides of the bridges. You get it. But people don't want to spend that extra time with like crossing the bridge. And it's almost like that mental block where, culturally, it's very acceptable to commute 45 minutes or an hour and a half in Vancouver.
One thing I will say about value, just thinking out loud here, one thing for anyone in Nova Scotia, obviously it's all Nova Scotia listening, but the one common or massive difference is, unfortunately, the Vancouver market is really reliant, especially the high valued real estate is really reliant on what somebody else outside of Canada is potentially doing, right, with foreign funds and everything. And that could cause a massive correction. And we've actually seen that. If you look back in the 80s, remember when Hong Kong pulled all their money out of Vancouver and what happened? It was the end of times. So one thing I do appreciate about hearing this is those massive corrections that could really put somebody in Halifax in a bad place, I think is a lot more unlikely, right?
I agree.
I wouldn't. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say stable, because look at what the market's been doing in the
and
last 2 years.
we've had double-digit increases. Like, we know that's
100%.
probably not going to keep up. Like, let's be honest. But it's a symptom of supply and demand, and I think that was really what drove up the prices in Vancouver and in BC too, right?
I think the thing and the best part is you're not going to see, what you said. There's going to be a correction, not a crisis, right? So in Hong Kong in the 80s, when they pulled their money out of Vancouver, it was a crisis. You had houses from $2 million that couldn't sell for $700,000.
Right.
People were upside down.
So why is that not going to happen here then?
Well, because you actually have people buying the homes and living in them. Right, you're not at the mercy of foreign money pulling in and out of a marketplace and leaving a pile of homes empty. Right, that doctor, that somebody coming from overseas, to Clinton's point, they're coming here because they want to live here.
It's a quality of life, really.
Which they're bringing their money here. They're investing in the economy, and everyone is kind of having an opportunity with that. So, I think what everyone has to be mindful of is, to Clinton's point, there's double-digit growth. Right, when that double-digit growth stops, that is not a crash. That is a correction.
From a lender's point of view, is there some concern about overvaluation?
I think when you're seeing rapid growth like this, you always are. And time to get on the mortgage broker soapbox for a second. But I think that's why it's really, really professional to have. It's really important to have a professional team around you, right? You've got to have a realtor around you that understands what the market could do. And based on your situation, could you get out, right? Because the biggest fear in this, Todd, is, is somebody going in with the minimum down payment? Is somebody going into a home at 5% down where the market could correct by 10%? And then guess what? Even if they sell the house, they don't have enough. Yeah. And people don't really think about that. But if you don't have enough to pay the bank back, you can't sell.
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
So it's something that I don't know. I don't see it in a Halifax situation. I think that we've got. I think
we have a good base here.
100%.
And there's not enough supply, and the demand is still quite high. So, and I think you've even said this before, Chris. Like, our prices were kind of undervalued compared to the rest of the country.
Every time I used to come out, I was like, oh,
you couldn't even believe it.
Yeah.
And now I think we've leveled up a lot. I don't think we're ever going to be Toronto or Vancouver.
Don't want to be.
No, but I was going to say, you don't want to be.
Mm-hmm.
You have the same amount of beauty. Like when we walked out the office and I'm looking.
More.
I'm
We
looking
have
at the
more
ocean.
beauty.
Well, come on now. That snow isn't.
Well, I don't know. That might be up for debate a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah, I had to walk for something to eat in the sleet with a scarf wrapped around my bald head. And I can live in Vancouver for the next 40 years, and I will never encounter that.
We don't want you here.
There's that East Coast hospitality.
I
That's how much
know. I mean, I know.
So bottom line is that we're in good shape here, and don't become Vancouver.
Yeah, don't become Vancouver. Luckily, I think the economies at scale here at play. You have real people that want to live here that are buying homes here. I think that's a fantastic thing. And the only other thing I would end with is make sure you've got a mortgage professional. A good mortgage broker will play realtor for a second and say, hey, have you considered the fact that there's a correction? You don't need a mortgage. You don't need a real estate license to do that, right? And surround yourself with a team of professionals.
Chris, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it very much.
Thanks for having me.
Chris Turcotte. What's your title again, Chris?
I'm president of Centum Financial Group.
Exactly. We'll be right back on City News 95.7.